If you guys have been living under a rock for the last 10 years, you might not have heard of Wish.com. And if you haven't, here's a quick explainer. It comes from China, and it's one of the dodgiest websites to ever grace this planet. Most of the products on there are deceptive, many of them are lies, and lots of them just don't ever arrive at all. And so when you want to start buying PC parts from there, which you can do, it gets a little bit dodgy, and I understand why the majority of people wouldn't want to do it, even though it can attract a good bargain. However, I'm not the majority of people, and so today I have decided we're going to be building a PC entirely out of components from Wish.com. That's everything down to the thermal paste. So thermal paste, SATA cables, motherboard, CPU, RAM, GPU, everything you can think of in this PC is coming from Wish.com. And so without further ado, how about we build that PC, test that PC, and see if we can actually play games on a PC built entirely out of parts from Wish. This is a project I've been working on for several months now. In fact, I originally thought of the idea back in February 2019. And so it's taken a while to definitely record this, set this all up and get it completed, because it's now coming up for July. And so what has happened along the way? Well, I'm going to cut to a clip I recorded several months back, and this is actually the one component that ended up being particularly dodgy. Everything seemed moderately okay, except for this one part. So you're going to have to excuse me for the poor camera quality. I had one take at filming this, and so you have to excuse all of that. We're going to cut back in time a few months and watch me open this motherboard, because you'd be surprised how poor quality it could be in. Okay, so here the first part of our Wish PC has officially arrived, and this here is our motherboard. And as you can see by the packaging, it really hasn't arrived in the best of condition. This is quite possibly the worst box I've ever seen in terms of, well, anything. It's battered, it's bruised. The only thing it's got going for it is it's absolutely wrapped in sellotape, so at least it's going to be waterproof, and I know there hasn't been any water inside of it. At least that's what it looks like from the outside. So if I take my scissors here, the box is clearly all in Chinese. It looks like it's essentially, because it's a gigabyte board, at least that's what it says in the description and all the images, I would assume it's just a Chinese used board that someone's selling on Wish. And yeah, it is tightly wrapped in here. Okay. Right, so yeah, you can really see the extent of the damage once I've taken the packaging off. And yeah, it's not really looking too good for this motherboard. Okay, let's flip open the box and see what's inside. Okay, well, we've got lots of bubble wrap, so that's a good start. We also have an intact I/O bracket. Now, the motherboard isn't obviously damaged at this point, so that's a good start. Oh, okay. Right. So, yeah, this motherboard has clearly got some substantial damage. So if we look there, you can see there is some major board flex going on. Like, that is not a straight motherboard at all. And you can also see all of the I/O ports have, well, the audio jacks are not properly attached to the bottom, and they are all incredibly rusty or dusty, I can't quite tell. No, this board is not looking like it is in good condition, and I am not hopeful that it is going to be working, especially looking at that massive bend in the motherboard. So we'll have to wait for the rest of the parts to arrive and then see how things go, but I am not hopeful for this motherboard. So I think we can all agree that motherboard definitely wasn't the best quality component we've ever seen, even though we can all tell it's second-hand and used. Even then, you know, I would never accept something like that from eBay unless it was very clearly documented before purchasing. Now, there are things like the power supply being pretty much completely unbranded and looking fairly dodgy with those ketchup and mustard cables. Outside of that, everything seemed, moderately okay. The Chinese stamp on the CPU, to be expected really. The RAM, yeah, it didn't come in the best packaging, but it looked in fine quality. And so, the case, that looked absolutely fine. Despite being extortionately expensive, it came well packaged and it worked. And so, I was actually reasonably surprised by how well the things were packaged, and not the quality of the components, but at least how well they looked and how well they were presented. Again, with the exception of the motherboard. And so, fingers crossed that the motherboard actually works. I think it's time that we probably build this PC and see if we can actually get every component together, make sure that I haven't accidentally bought anything that isn't compatible. I think it's all okay. I think. Fingers crossed. So now is probably the time to address the elephant in the room. What components did we actually get? Well, our main components were actually fairly standard. For our CPU, we received an Intel Core 2 Duo 6700, and that fits perfectly into our beaten and bruised Gigabyte GA G31M LGA 775 motherboard. We then maxed out our RAM capacity with an outstanding 4GB of DDR2 memory that will be running in dual channel mode. And obviously for our GPU, we'll be using the infamous Wish GTX 960, which of course, as everyone knows, isn't actually a GTX 960. Please, for the love of God, stop buying them. Now, anyway, with that little rant aside, like I said, every single component came from Wish. Now, I have no idea what make or model this case is, but at least it looks decent. The CPU cooler is what really blew my mind though. It's actually quite good value for money, coming in at only £8 including shipping. And if you ask me, that's pretty good value for money because they're not the cheapest things to manufacture, and also postage isn't that cheap either, so for £8 and for them to make a profit isn't too bad. Our hard drive ended up being a used 250GB Seagate 7200 RPM 3.5-inch drive. Now in 2019, ideally we'd have an SSD, and you can get SSDs on Wish, but buying a hard drive for some unknown reason at the time, to me, sounded like a lot more fun. Our power supply felt pretty dodgy, though clearly wasn't the cheapest box of scraps around, as the manufacturer at least put some effort into its aesthetics, though it really was a very minimal effort. Looking at those ketchup and mustard cables, disgusting. But with the PC assembled, it's probably about time that we boot it up to see if we can actually run this thing. Will it actually work, and can you build a PC entirely out of parts from Wish? So I'm sure lots of you can guess from the fact that you're looking at me rather than a working computer that the Wish PC did not work. And after lots of careful and very professional diagnosis, it would appear the motherboard was at fault, and so I went back onto Wish and ordered another one, waiting for that to arrive and then swapping it out. And finally, we have a working computer. The Wish PC finally booted. It was working almost without any issues, unless you count the millions and millions of blue screens I had to go through whilst testing this. But someone has to put up with those blue screens for a reason. And so I did. I put up with the blue screens and we went through it, and I have tested some games for you. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, games do indeed work on the Wish PC. Not well at all, but they work. And so, without further ado, let's get into the benchmarks. I was unfortunately very limited to the games and software that I was able to benchmark because I was limited to anything that essentially wouldn't immediately crash the computer, which wasn't actually that much. I tried the likes of Fortnite and PUBG, but both crashed either before I could touch the ground or before I could get to the main menu. Trying to run Cinebench also caused the PC to crash almost immediately, though Unigine Heaven was able to run without issue. And so there we saw average frames of 16 FPS, 1% lows of 10 FPS, and 0.1% lows of 6 FPS. Minecraft actually ran surprisingly well, considering how old the CPU is. At 1080p with fast lighting, we saw an average FPS of 39, with 1% lows of 5.4 FPS and 0.1% lows of 3.5 FPS. so whilst occasionally stuttering, for the most part, the game ran just fine. We usually try GTA 3 in my graphics card review videos. However, I felt like since this PC claimed to have a GTX 960, I thought we would try GTA 4. And to my surprise again, at 1080p medium, we maintained an average of just over 30 FPS, with 0.1% lows only ever dropping as far as 8.7 FPS. Far Cry 3 was actually quite disappointing, especially considering how cards like the HD 5450 performed in my previous videos, achieving an average FPS of just 22.5 and 0.1% lows of 4.5 FPS. On the flip side of that though, are our final two games. Both of these games really surprised me with how well they performed. Just Cause 2 ran with no bugs or errors, and we had a reasonably stable average FPS of 41, only dropping to 8.9 FPS for our 0.1% lows. And the final game we'll be looking at is Team Fortress 2, because I had to have at least one free-to-play game in the lineup. Averaging 49 FPS was fairly impressive, however our 0.1% lows weren't quite as good, dropping to a horrendous 1.6 FPS. And so it's time to come to a conclusion. Is this PC worth buying? Well, I'm definitely not going to start recommending everyone go out and start buying their PC parts from Wish. In fact, that should have been incredibly obvious just from the fact that this PC blue screens around every single corner. But disregarding that and assuming you got a PC that worked absolutely fine, I actually calculated how much I spent on this PC, and that came to £269.20, which is an absurd amount of money, even considering the fact I had to buy the motherboard twice. Even discounting that, that's an absurd amount of money to spend on the parts that we received, and especially for the performance we received as well. In fact, you'd be miles better off purchasing a used gaming PC from either eBay or Facebook Marketplace. That will almost always serve you better, and I doubt, unless you get incredibly ripped off, you will get a worse deal that way. Especially considering the majority of the hardware on Wish is second-hand anyway, you're really not losing much by purchasing from either eBay or Facebook Marketplace. Especially considering Wish has a pretty dodgy returns policy, I wouldn't recommend it under any circumstances. So, really, can you buy a PC from Wish? Well, technically speaking, yes you can. But should you? Well, I think that's a pretty clear answer. The answer is going to be no. Don't start buying PC parts from Wish. Instead, if you really want to go with China, AliExpress is somehow far more reliable. So please do be sure to hit like and subscribe if you did enjoy that video, and make sure to leave a comment if you've ever purchased a PC part from Wish, and let me know what your experience was like. I'd love to know, and I always read everyone's comments. So if you have ever purchased a PC part from Wish, please do be sure to leave your experience down in the comment section down below. But without further ado, I've been Robert, and I hope you enjoyed this video.